All right, so we're going to start chapter 4 in A&B2. Chapter 4 deals with histology. And histology is the study of tissues. So if you remember, a tissue is a group of cells that perform a specialized function. So when we look at this, we're going to look at 4 basic tissue types. So the first is epithelial tissue. Now, epithelial tissues are typically coverings. So they cover, like our skin is epithelium, what lines our digestive system is epithelium, what lines our respiratory system is epithelium. All right. Next is connective tissue, and this is showing various connective tissues. The main function the connective tissue has is that it provides us with support. Next is the muscle tissue. Muscle tissue provides us with movement. That's the main function there. Now, for this chapter, we're going to look at primarily epithelial and connective tissue. We'll talk about muscle tissue when you get to the muscular system. And the same thing with nervous tissue. And this is the 4th basic tissue type, is nervous tissue. And nervous tissue controls the other tissue types. And once again, we'll look at nervous tissue when we get into the nervous system. All right, before we get into the different tissue types, let's look at membrane junctions. So these are things that are going to hold cells together. And the first are called tight junctions, and that's what we see up here. That's a tight junction there. This is an area where the plasma membrane of adjacent cells are fused. All right, so basically we have cell adhesion molecules on either side, and it's going to fuse those plasma membranes together. And what this does is it prevents substances from moving in between those cells. So nothing can do that. So these guys line the cells along our digestive tract, and that prevents substances from moving in between those cells. Because we secrete enzymes to break down proteins and carbohydrates and everything else into our digestive tract, we don't want those full molecules or even those enzymes to get into our blood system. All right. Next are desmosomes. This is showing a desmosome right here. A desmosome is a cell junction composed of thickened plasma membranes that are joined by filaments. All right, and these are going to hold the cells together. And these are found between cardiac muscle cells and also skin cells. Next are gap junctions. So these are gap junctions over here. A gap junction is essentially a channel protein between adjacent cells. So it's essentially a passageway between 2 adjacent cells, so cells right next to each other. And this allows substances to move from one cell to the next. And so what this makes it is so that not every cell in our body has to be directly connected to a blood supply. So if this cell is next to a blood vessel, it's going to get oxygen, it's going to get nutrients. Well, those nutrients can move into the next cell by diffusion, and then waste products can move back in the opposite direction. All right, and we find gap junctions pretty much in a lot of organs, but they're not found between organs. All right. Let's look at epithelial tissue. Now, epithelial tissues cover all 3 surfaces. So let's look at some characteristics of epithelia. Here we're looking at simple squamous epithelium. Very high magnification on this. All right, and what we see here is the cells are closely packed together. So let's look at characteristics. Closely packed together cells. So one cell right after the next. No spaces in between them. All right. Next, those cells are bound together. This is either by gap junctions, either by tight junctions or desmosomes. They all have an apical surface. Now, apical means a free surface. So you see here the cells above them, nothing. All right? So all these epithelial tissues are going to have space above them at some point. They are supported by connective tissues. So below them is connective tissue. And then we also see this structure called a basement membrane. It's essentially an adhesive between the connective tissue and the epithelial tissue. So it's a layer of non-living material that anchors epithelial tissue to connective tissue. Next, they're avascular. So avascular means they lack blood vessels. All right. And then lastly, they have a high regenerative ability. So they heal very quickly. So, you know, if you're like me and you can't wait until, the pizza cools after you get it out of the oven, and then you bite into it and the sauce hits the roof of your mouth and burns it. Well, it kind of sucks and you'll have that burn for a couple days, but it heals very quickly. And so, that's what we see with epithelial tissues. It'll heal, faster than other tissues. Look at functions of epithelial tissue. One, it protects underlying tissues. Absorption, can absorb nutrients, lines our digestive tract. Filtration, so the filtration process that we talked about occurring in capillaries is a function of epithelial tissue. Excretion, so when we talk about excretion, we're talking about getting rid of waste products. So that occurs here. Also secretion, so secretion is secreting a product like secreting sweat or saliva, stuff like that. And also sensory reception. So there are a few epithelial tissues that cells that are used for sensory reception. Most of our sensory receptors are nervous tissue, but a few of them are epithelial, like your taste bud cells are epithelial in nature. Let's look at the classification of epithelia. So, when you say simple, simple means it's one cell layer. Versus stratified, stratified means more than one cell layer. So, all right, you're going to see other terms like squamous. Squamous means it's scale-like, all right? They have these flattened nuclei, flattened cells, flattened nuclei. Cuboidal means it's box-like in appearance. And columnar are tall and narrow cells, like a column, all right? So, you know, in lab, we went through a lot of different epithelial tissues. So we're not going to review a lot of these here again. You know, here's simple squamous, you know, making up the Bowman's capsule there. There's simple cuboidal, simple columnar. You know, here's stratified squamous there. You know, this is one we didn't cover, stratified cuboidal. Here's stratified columnar. You know, we didn't cover that in lab either. You know, my favorite pseudostratified columnar epithelium right there, just rolls off the tongue. You know, transitional epithelium is another one we didn't cover. So, you know, the ones we covered, we'll cover that, keep that in the lab portion of the class. All right, what I do want to cover here is glandular epithelium. And what a gland is an organ specialized to secrete substances, okay? And so this is showing a variety of glands in their shapes and sizes. The simplest is a goblet cell, all right? So when it comes to glands, there's two major types of glands. Ones are endocrine glands, and these are glands that secrete hormones directly into the blood. And we're going to talk about the endocrine system and these endocrine glands later on this semester. So we're going to look at exocrine glands. So exocrine glands are glands that secrete products into ducts that open to some internal or external surface, right? So internal surface, like into your digestive tract or into your respiratory passages. External, like onto your skin, your eyes, okay? And so here's looking in. So here is the duct. So the duct is just some cells in there that don't secrete anything, all right? So these are the secretory portions. So you can see, you know, they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. I'm not really worried about that. I'm going to talk about how they secrete substances. So if we go to this picture here, this is showing a merocrine gland. So merocrine glands are glands that release products by exocytosis, so which we talked about already. So exocytosis is where you have a vesicle. It's going to fuse with the plasma membrane. It's going to open up and release its contents out of the cell. So this is how we get saliva out of salivary glands, tears out of lacrimal glands, sweat out of sweat glands. Okay. Next are apicrine glands. So in apicrine glands, these are glands that lose small portions of their glandular cell bodies during secretion. All right. And so here, pieces of the cell are broken off. So here you get, you know, vesicles filled with that product, and then pieces of the cell will break off, and this breaks up as it moves along and releases the products that way. So there are some sweat glands called apicrine sweat glands that release it this way. Also mammary glands are apicrine. Lastly are holocrine. So this is showing holocrine glands here. So holocrine glands, these are glands that release entire cells, all right? So instead of releasing by exocytosis or pieces of the cell, here the cell fills up with the product, and then the entire cell is released, and so then it breaks up as well. You've got a lot of mitosis occurring in these areas. So this is found with sebaceous glands. Those are the oil glands that are associated with hair follicles.